While some high-flying AI names from 2023 have found their way back to reality in 2024, the question is which AI plays will be the story for this year? And the man with us today, Ray Blanco, has an answer for us. Ray famously recommended NVIDIA prior to it crossing the $5 mark. So I think it was trading around $3 or so. And he's saying that the next surge from the AI boom isn't going to be of chip manufacturer at all. In fact, this next big AI winner is going to come from a field that uses as much data as any industry in the world. I'll let Ray tell the story. Let's get started.
Great to be
Right.
here. So, yeah, applications are going to be huge. People that can use AI intelligently and productively are going to create new businesses. I like to maybe liken this to Amazon. The internet was a big deal, but companies that like Amazon, that were able to build new businesses around the internet were some of the biggest success stories as second wave internet stocks, right? And I'm a bio guy. I've been very interested in biotechnology my whole life. As a cancer survivor at a very early age, I became fascinated by all this stuff. I grew up watching Star Trek with Dad. Dr. McCoy's sick bay on the Enterprise. That stuff's always interested me. So I guess you could say it's in my DNA, which we'll get into shortly. But I think AI is something that is already becoming completely transformative for the discovery and development of new drugs, which is great because we really, really need it. Back in the mid '00s, around 2004, 2005, there was a book that made huge waves called The $800 million Pill, The Truth Behind the Cost of New Drugs. And it was insanely expensive. In pharma and biotech, 90%, if not more, failure rates for drugs. It takes at least 10 drugs in development for one to get to market. It takes years to discover a new drug, and then 90% of them fail. And when you would account for all that, back then, you were spending $800 million in research and development to get an experimental therapy through the regulatory and clinical trial process and finally get it to market so that people can use it. You can start making your money back.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why drugs are so expensive. It's gotten a lot worse. I think one of the things that happened is all the stuff that we could deal with using the old ways of doing things, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, most of that's been picked. We've got targets that we think could work to treat different diseases, but the old tools, it's in terms of human years, it takes a long time. In fact, there was a study not that long ago. We're up to $2.6 billion now. It's a $2.6 billion pill because of these factors. So the beauty of AI is that you can greatly accelerate the discovery process because you can model the interactions of different molecules and proteins inside human cells, and you can generate models of human cells. And there's a lot more too. So you not only can you test a molecule and simulate it in silicon, right, in a computer, using computational biology. But with AI now and generative AI, you can do something that you couldn't even do a few years ago, which is you can actually not have to go with the library of molecules that you painstakingly, engineered or discovered and run them through a computer. You can have a computer generate them like a chatbot, only it's a biobot, I guess you could think of it. You've got some researcher coming from academia who's identified, man, if we hit this target, it could be a really great lung cancer therapy, or this could be really great for Alzheimer's or multiple sclerosis or anything like that. We just don't know what to do. The AI can actually generate de novo from scratch, 3 or 4 really strong candidates. It could generate many more than that. But then you have another AI run it through a simulation, weed out the best candidates. Then you can go with those in the preclinical setting in test tubes and cultures and lab rats and test them, and then weed that out to the best one, and then go to the FDA, give them your documentation, and go into human clinical trials. Way cheaper than doing it with people and way faster. It takes years to get to that point where you can get at least into the lab and test it in the lab, and then be able to go into people and test it in people. So it's utterly transformative. So we're going to see a huge uptick in productivity. And from an investor perspective, the really strong companies are going to build out huge pipelines, are going to be huge commercial successes. It's going to be like the biotech boom that started in the 80s with those classic old companies like Genentech that engineered synthetic insulin. That was the beginning of biotech, really, in the 80s, at least on the therapeutic side of things. We're at the early stages of this wave where they're doing the work, and we're going to see, these pipelines take a while for drugs to run through and get to market. But we're going to see just a huge boom, and we're seeing that. And we're going to see some of these companies, 10 years from now, people talking about, the 3,000% gains they made in X. And, it's going to be part of market history. So we're right now at that point where you can identify, there's a lot of companies that are not public yet, but there's some really good ones that are. If you do your due diligence, you can identify some of these companies as really good long-term plays on the biotech boom.
Well, I know you have a list of a few stocks that you want to run through and kind of
Yeah.
throw your candidates into play to see which one's going to be the best for 2024. And I definitely want to touch on those. But I would imagine as a result of AI, making such a big splash, there's a race going on in biotech firms to get access to the NVIDIA chips, right? The fastest chips around so that they can process these very complex and huge data sets as quickly as possible. What do you see in terms of like winners and losers in that space? Is big pharma going to run away with this, or is it going to be some of the smaller players that are more agile that are going to benefit the most?
It's going to be a little bit of both. So big pharma, for years, they've talked about their flagging R&D budgets. They've got huge marketing teams, commercialization teams. When they do get something out there, they know how to sell it.
Yeah.
Okay, they're really good at that. But they haven't really invested in that side of things, although that's starting to change. Okay. Some of these small companies are the ones that have done a lot of the innovation in that space. What big pharma does is, see, they've got an issue. So when drug falls off patent and goes generic, the revenues go through the floor.
Hmm.
Drugs are perishable assets for big pharma for that very reason. So they've always got to replenish their pipelines either through internal R&D or going out to the minor leagues, which is small biotech companies, and getting their best, players, if you want to call it that. So they have a couple of ways of doing that. If there's a company that's really good at doing something, and including AI, by the way, and I'll get into that in a moment. They'll say, "Look, we have this target we think will work in disease X. We'll pay you $100 million up front. You'll get another 250 million milestone payments, and then tiered double-digit royalties if this thing gets to market." They'll go there and they'll start to co-develop with the small biotech, and biotech will do a lot of the work, and they do that, or they'll just go in and buy somebody outright. And if you hold one of these companies, you wake up in the morning and, hey, we were up 50%, and they just got bought at an 80% premium over their previous closing price. You're pretty happy that
Yeah,
day.
right. Yeah.
Time to hit the sell button and go on to the next one.
Right.
And we've had a pretty good track record over the years. I mean, if you look at all the at the number of acquisitions over the last 15, 20 years of public biotech companies, a really good number of them have been, not to toot my own horn, but my past pits. So they do that. So it's both. It's a bit of both. But when you're dealing with a huge, 50, $100 billion pharma company, the upside. So it's a safer investment, right? They got tons of cash, and they can go out and buy what they need to buy, but you're not going to see those, 3-digit and 4-digit gains in 5 years' time, let's say,
Right.
that you'll see in a, in 150, 250 million, $500 million biotech company.
Right.
And that's the stuff that, I like to look at.
Well, let's do this. Yeah, and I know that you've done a really good job with your Catalyst Trader service over the years in that regard. I know. Let's get to the picks because I know you have three different targets, three different opportunities that you want to present here today. Let's talk about the first one that's using AI in a way that you think is going to help just be a massive catalyst for this business?
Sure. So it's a company that was founded by Vivek Ramaswamy. Some of you folks listening out there probably have heard of him. He was running for president on the Republican ticket, and then he dropped out. It's just one person now running for the Republican nomination that I'm aware of. And this company's called Roivant, and the ticker symbol is Roy. And they have an AI platform. In fact, they have several. This company's business model is to use that AI platform to develop drugs, or this is interesting, identify languishing assets elsewhere that the owner doesn't know what the heck they're sitting on, because they can look at that particular molecule using their computers and their AI and see, oh wow, there's value there that these people are not aware of. Let's go buy it and develop it ourselves. So Roivant founds a bunch of little subsidiaries, you know, that they call them bonds, VANTS, and they have different names. They all lended bonds. But the interesting thing about Roivant is last year they made, I don't know, I think it might be the best biotech trade in history. Back at the end of 2022, I believe it was December, there was this drug at Roche that they were had there for inflammatory gastrointestinal conditions, bowel conditions, stuff like that, that they owned. And Roivant looked at it and they said, this drug is going to be awesome. Okay. So they went to Roche and they bought it for $45 million. They formed a new subsidiary around that disease and that set of disease indications and that molecule as their lead molecule. And then they've spent $5 million only. So they spent $50 million buying it and pushing it further along in clinical development. 10 months later, in 2023, they sold it for $7.1 billion. That's a 10,000, more than 10,000% gain in 10 months. Okay.
I mean,
yeah. So this is a really good company. When you buy Roivant, again, ticker symbol ROIV, you're buying like almost like a little mini ETF. They're all part of the same big company, but you're buying a really small companies, and they share the same platform of the parent company to assist them in their efforts, and everything from cancer to the neurological conditions. It runs the gamut of disease conditions. And considering this kind of success that they had recently, I mean, they walked away. They were a 75% owner of the asset. They went into the deal with someone else. Someone else owned 25%, but they walked away with more than $5 billion in 10 months on a $50 billion investment. So I think that kind of shows they know what they're doing. They have a really good AI platform, and they're really smart deal makers, which is important as well.
okay, so you got Roivant as number one AI biotech play. What's your next one, Ray? Because this is the one that really is interesting to me. So what's that one? Why don't you talk about that one?
It's called Schrodinger SDGR. They're kind of an interesting company. And the next one is, well, these are all interesting companies. They're a software company. They've developed their platform for more than 30 years. And, they sell software, and it's used for drug discovery, material science and chemistry, for modeling all this kind of stuff. And it's got AI built into it as well. Well, they've taken their own software and they said, hey, man, let's go ahead. We're going to become a drug development company ourselves. So they got a pipeline of nearly 10 drugs that they've discovered in-house, and they're pushing through the drug discovery process. And what I like about this hybrid model that they have is that they're generating software revenues. That's non-diluted income. They don't have to go out and necessarily raise cash all that often, like your typical pre-commercial stage biotech, which is a great thing. And they've got a long track record as a software company, and I think they're going to have a lot of success with their approach to bringing new drugs to market.
Like just looking at that chart briefly, obviously it looked like it had some success very, very early on from a stock perspective, and
Yeah.
it's fallen off lately. Does that concern you at all? I mean, how do you apply that data into your recommendation?
Well, you got to look at it also as a function of how biotech in general has played out. So if you look at, for example, the S&P Speeder, whatever you want to call it, SPDR, XBI, which is the biotech ETF, which is the one I like to use a lot of the benchmark because it's very well weighted towards smaller biotech, which is what interests me principally. You looked at this is something that's happened to biotech in general. We went into sort of a bubble mode during the COVID era, and in 2021 that kind of popped, and it was really the worst 2 years in my career of being a biotech analyst, which
Mhm.
is going on 2 decades now doing that. But really, if you look at history, I've looked at it. It's the worst 2 years going back to the 90s and maybe even earlier than that. But that's turning around, and then had some other macro problems going on with the higher interest rates. It's affected a lot of smaller innovation names that aren't really big revenue generators right now. So it's not something intrinsic to Schrodinger itself. But like I mentioned, they say we're going to go into a cutting cycle here very soon. I think that's very plausible, which will be very good for biotech in general as a timing situation. And biotech's done in general has done well for the last few weeks since April. So we're getting into an uptrend. Let's see if it's sustainable. But
Yeah.
it's a long-term play. I think Schrodinger is one of the more credible, well-founded names, has a broad pipeline, and I think it's a very respectable AI company.
Yeah, and it looks like by the basis of that chart, I mean, it's got a lot going for it in terms of value for what you're getting. You got 10 drugs in there, they're using AI. So it looks like there could be some better days ahead there and getting in at a good valuation. All right, let's move on to number three, your AI biotech number three company. What do you got for us?
This company is called AbCellera. The ticker symbol is ABCL or AbCellera. Maybe that's the proper pronunciation. AbCellera.
Okay.
Now, AbCellera is interesting. They focus exclusively on monoclonal antibodies to build therapies out of monoclonal antibodies. And this was, I believe, the first company to use generative AI. This is close to 10 years ago. That's how ahead of the curve these guys are to be able to go ahead and build an AI platform and publish papers and stuff like that back then. And as you can see, the company's gotten really pretty darn cheap. Um, Knowledge, this is the only company on the planet that's ever had an AI discovered therapy approved by the FDA and come to market. And it was under interesting circumstances. Again, that chart's reflective of COVID-19, and the approvals were also reflective of COVID-19. So the antibody therapy giant out there is Regeneron, really a transformational company in that space. It was COVID-19. We need to get some antibody therapies, some COVID-19 neutralizing antibodies out there on the market quick. We got to discover them really fast and get them out there real quick. And Regeneron, the 500-pound antibody gorilla in the room, who did they turn to for getting it done quick? They turned to AbCellera because AbCellera has this incredible AI platform. I'll get into this in a second. They can do it fast with their, and they spent many years building out their platform. It's not just their platform, it's the incredible computer scientists and biomedical experts that they have that they've built this incredible team for doing this. And now they've built this machine, this drug discovery machine. And they have an interesting model. So they've got sort of like a three-legged stool for their business. They deal with big pharma. So big pharma, they've got over a dozen drugs in their pipeline, and it's a who's list of big pharma companies that are partnering with them. Big pharma company will come and make a deal with them. It's a deal like the one I mentioned a little bit ago. We want you to discover and take it all the way up to preclinical. Then we'll grab the baton and run from there. We'll pay you for your work. We'll put you in line for really big milestone payments, hundreds of millions of dollars. And if we get all this thing all the way to market, you're in line for royalties. So if we sell $5 billion of this drug, you're going to get a double digit cut on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Number two, they're an accelerator for small biotech. Okay. And they've actually been very helpful. A researcher at one of our premier medical research universities out there. I mean, in your area, that would be Johns Hopkins for sure. The University of California system has incredible programs. Harvard Medical, things like that. And you've got this killer target that kills cancer or something really amazing. What you got to do out there is you got to start up your company. You got to raise tons of money, and it's going to be 5 years if you're lucky before we even get to preclinical phase. All right, now instead of having to raise 100 million, you might only have to raise 50 because you chop 2 or 3 years off of that. You go to AbCellera, and those deals are structured differently. I'll tell you in a second. You go to AbCellera, and they do that. They get your target, and they do that work, and then they give you 2 or 3 candidates to work with. Okay, and those deals can be structured differently. For example, the option to co-develop and have a 50% ownership in it with the small biotech.
Yeah.
And then even just existing biotechs that already have pipelines are doing this work with them to be able to bring drugs to the clinical phase faster. On top of that, they're building out now their own preclinical facility so that they can also do that kind of work for others if they want it done. So they do that. Plus, there's areas of drug discovery that are really difficult problems, dealing with T-cell modifying therapies for different kinds of immune therapies that they're working really hard in-house. G-protein coupled receptor drugs. These are, just surface receptors on cells that are drug targets. They're doing a lot of work there. And what they're trying to do is develop in-house candidates in these general kind of areas for different diseases that they can advance into early stage clinical trials, maybe phase 1, maybe even phase 2, a proof of concept trial, validate this thing enough that it's got demonstrated value, and then go out to big pharma and let big pharma buy it or partner on it and let them finish it off, do the finishing on it. And, by then it's a lot of the risk has been taken out of it.
De-risked a lot, yeah.
De-risked a lot, and it's got a lot of data validating it. And then it's a co-ownership type of situation where they'll own 50% of the asset and get 50% of the revenues. So they've decided we're not going to be a selfish little biotech company and just do our own stuff. No, we're going to be a one-stop shop for the entire industry. Anybody can come to us, sign a deal, and we've already got the tools. We built this monster platform, and we'll put it to work for the entire industry.
Yeah, that's I don't know, that might be my favorite of the group.
I like it. Yeah, it's a great one.
AbCellera, that's ABCL. Well, Ray, I mean, you've been following this field for a very long time. You have a personal interest, as you mentioned. You've been in this for 20 years or so. I very much, value your recommendations here. I'm going to keep an eye on all three of these, and maybe by the end of the year, we'll visit up again and see which one of these led the pack in the AI biotech race for 2024.
Yeah, we can do an update. Sounds great.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. That's Ray Blanco. Thank you all very much. If you like this kind of content, go ahead and click subscribe, join our group, and we'll be out every single week with a new piece of content where we're diving into some hot topic in the markets, and we'd love to have you as part of our family. Thank you very much, Ray, and we'll talk to you soon.